Hi everyone, Anthony Morganti here. A few days ago, I did a video demonstrating my current workflow for a landscape image. In that video, I mentioned that if anyone would like to see my workflow for a specific type of image, to let me know. Well, overwhelmingly, people asked me if I could show my current workflow for a wildlife image. Also, a few people mentioned that that landscape edit I did was a relatively easy edit, and they thought that they would learn more if I would edit an image that needed a little bit more done to it, a little bit more of a difficult edit. So in today's video, we're going to edit a wildlife image, and it's going to be an image that isn't perfect, one that I have to crop, one that I have to run through noise reduction and do some more editing to. I have two images that I'm considering, and I mentioned in my previous video that what I do is I put all the images in the film strip and I go through them one by one and decide which one I want to edit first. What I do with wildlife images is I go through them and I look first at the overall framing of the animal, the expression of the animal, and I kind of narrow it down that way. Then once I have some images that satisfy me in those regards, what I'll do is I'll look to see which one is the sharpest. And all I do is I just A/B them next to each other. For example, I have this first image, just zoom in on the woodpecker's head to see how sharp it is. And by the way, you can see that there's a considerable amount of noise. It was shot at ISO 800, and it's one that I'm going to have to run noise reduction on. I'll get more into that in a moment. So what I do is I just want to determine which one is sharpest of the bunch. Now, I only have two in this example. So I have this first one, and then I have this second one. In just eyeballing them, it appears the first one is just a bit sharper than the second one. Now, obviously, I'm looking at the woodpecker's head, the eyeball specifically, and that's what I would do with my wildlife images because that's where I focus. I'll go through them and just see which one is sharpest at my focus point. And again, for wildlife, that's most often the eye or around the eye of the animal. So I've determined that the first one is sharper than the second one. You'll notice the first one isn't framed perfectly. The second one is framed a little bit better, but either of these images I would crop. So that's another thing I'm adding to my workflow to show you how I go about with, determining how to crop an image. So I've determined that this first image is the one that I'm going to work on. Just like my landscape edit, the first thing I do is reduce noise. I do it right away. Now, I mentioned that in some instances, and usually for a landscape image, I will just use the built-in noise reduction that's in Lightroom. So I'd go to the Detail tab and click on Denoise. But if I do have an image, particularly a wildlife image that has higher ISO and has a considerable amount of noise, and the noise seems to be affecting the sharpness of the image, making it a bit softer, that I will use one of two plugins, either Topaz Labs Photo AI or Pure Raw 4. One of those two, and it really, as I mentioned in that other video, it just comes down to what I feel like doing. It's really not favoring one or the other because one is better. I think they actually both do a great job. It might be I feel like using Pure Raw today, so I'll use that, or I might feel like using Topaz Labs Photo AI today, so I'll use that. Now, for this specific image, I'm going to use Topaz Labs Photo AI because I have an entire course on Photo AI, so I'll have that linked in the description below this video, and I'll have a discount code so you could save $10 on the course. Now, I mentioned, again, I do it first thing. After I determine which image I'm working on, I'm going to send it directly into Photo AI, and the way I do it, keep my raw format throughout my workflow is I go up to File, then down to Plugin Extras, and then down to the bottom, Process with Topaz Photo AI. If you use the more common method of going to the Edit In menu, Photo, Edit In, you can't keep your raw format throughout the workflow. So what I mentioned there is if you go up to Photo and you go down to Edit In, and then you go down to Topaz Labs Photo AI, this way you have to send it over as a TIFF, PSD, or JPEG, and Topaz Labs recommends a TIFF file. So you're losing the raw format, and I don't want to do that. So that's why I use the other method, File, plug in extras, then all the way down to the bottom, process with Topaz Photo AI. Now, because this is an icon raw file, it's just going to immediately open it up into Topaz Labs Photo AI. And again, I mention this all the time. I do a video on Photo AI. If you're not familiar with Topaz Labs Photo AI, when you first open an image up into it, there it's starting to go now. I was wondering why it was taking so long. If you open an image up into Topaz Labs Photo AI, it will do something called autopilot. It will examine the image and determine what it needs. And for this image, if you look over at the right-hand panel, it needs raw denoise done to it. That was obvious. There was a lot of noise. And it has determined that the subject needs to be sharpened. And you can see that it says subject right here. And when I hover over that, you can see that it has a red overlay. So it found the subject fine. And that's what I want. I want it to just sharpen the subject. I don't care about the tree or the background. I definitely don't want the blurry background sharpened. I just want the subject sharpened. So what I will do then, just to make sure first that the raw denoise is to my satisfaction, is I'll zoom in to a critical point in the image. And that's going to be where I focused. So it's going to be right on the head of the woodpecker, and I'll let it render. It does take a second to re-render. And if you want to see a before after, there's a couple of different ways you could do that. The way I do it is I just click right on the image. There's before, and then let go with the left mouse button. There's after. You also could go down to the eyeball and just click on the eyeball to see a before, and then click on the little eyeball again to see the after. Now, the noise looks pretty good. There's a little bit of like mottled look over here, but the noise, the actual grain is gone. So that looks good. And as far as the sharpening is concerned, there's before, there's after. It did sharpen the image. Now, you may be tempted to sharpen it more because really you could get more sharpening out of this. You definitely can get this sharper. But I'm at the very beginning of my workflow, and I could do sharpening and stuff in Lightroom that will be just fine once the noise is removed. So I'm not so concerned about making this perfectly sharp yet. I just want to make it sharper. And this definitely is sharper. Now I do want to go and open up the raw denoise here, and I just want to look at it and see what it's doing. Autopilot has determined that raw normal was the best AI model to use, and it's strength at 22 and minor to blur at 1. If it adds sharpen, autopilot adds sharpen to the image, it will always put minor to blur all the way down, and it doesn't go down to 0, it goes down to 1. That's the lowest number, so it will have it there, and that's fine. But this kind of little weird look down here, I want to mess with that. So what I'll do is I'll take strength up, and what I usually do is go somewhere between where it is and maximum. Maximum is 100, so somewhere in the middle, in the 60s somewhere, I'll just do it. Now, you have to wait for it to re-render. You can see in the lower left-hand corner, there's a little progress bar. Now, it definitely got rid of this modeling over here. That looks better, but it made it softer. There's before and there's after, so obviously it's going to do that. So what I'll do is I'll split the difference going the other way. I started where this little line is, and I'll just come somewhere in the middle, which is in the 40s, and let it re-render there. And actually that still looks pretty good. So I'll split the difference again, and it got a little sharper. This is the way I do it. Sometimes, though, I will try a different AI model, too, if I don't get satisfaction here. This actually looks pretty good as well. It's starting to get a little bit modeled in there. It's hard to tell. But around 34, 35 look good. But I could then try raw strong. I'll just try it. The raw strong has 3 sliders: strength, minor to blur, and remove large grain. There was no large grain here to worry about. The strength, there's still a little noise in here when it's at 11. So I'll just move it up about halfway between 11 and 100 and see what it does. And it's making the image very soft. It got rid of all the noise there. So I think the original raw normal was fine with the strength, around 30 to 34 in there somewhere's fine. Let it render, and it's making, or the woodpecker's head is very sharp. There's before, there's after, and the noise looks excellent. What I'll then do is I'll drag around, kind of see other areas if needed. Really, this image, I don't need to really drag it around as much because I'll fit it to screen. I plan on cropping it relatively tight to the woodpecker. So I'm going to be cropping away most of the background that's blurry and much of the tree. So I really don't have to worry about much here. I just want to make sure that the head of the woodpecker is nice and sharp and all the noise around the woodpecker and the woodpecker itself is reduced. So I really didn't have to worry too much about this modeling over here anyway, because I am cropping it. So I kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? I kind of just messed up in a way, worrying about this kind of weird, kind of like noise pattern that was over here when it's probably going to be cropped away anyway. So no big deal there. So I even probably could reduce this down to what it was, which was 22, and not worry about it. I'll let it re-render. You can see the progress bar down here in the lower left-hand corner. So, all I did was waste a lot of time, really. So that looks pretty good right there. We'll click Export to Adobe Lightroom Classic. So it's going to save this new file as a DNG file. So again, I'm keeping that raw format throughout my workflow. And then it will close down Photo AI, and it will return us to Lightroom. Now, theoretically, it should put this new DNG file back in the same original folder as the original. What happens sometimes, though, with Topaz Labs Photo AI, there's a bug in it where it doesn't always put that DNG file into the original raw file or original folder. It just doesn't add it. But it's easy to take care of. What you need to do, and it's doing it to me now, so it's working out well. Go over to Library. I'm in this Rhinestone Woods. This is where this was, and it was from June of 2016. All you need to do is right-click right on that folder, and then go down to Synchronize Folder. And when you do that, you'll see that it has an image in this folder that isn't in Lightroom. It's right here, Import New Photos. Make sure that's checked. You can scan for data updates if you need to. I usually have that checked. It's no big deal. And then do this, and then it will add the photo. So if you encounter that from Topaz Labs Photo AI, just do that, and you can see that we have our DNG file here now. Oops, I hit I too many times. There it is right there. So it's our DNG file. Here's the original Nikon RAW file. So I have this DNG file. It is pretty sharp. It's not perfectly sharp, but it's nicely sharp, and it has reduced noise. Now, all of that to get step one out of the way. And step two is cropping. So I'll go to the crop tool, and I'll crop this. Now, I think I'm going to crop it vertically, as I kind of implied when we were talking before. So I'm going to keep the original aspect ratio, except I want to flip it vertically. To do that, just tap the X key on your keyboard to flip it vertically. And then we'll do something like this. Let's see what that looks like. And then I'll just close the crop tool to accept the crop. And I like that. I think that looks pretty good. Next, what I'll do is I'll go to the Basic tab and I'll choose a different profile if needed. I have this specific Nikon camera set up so it uses the camera standard profile, and I'm just going to stay with that. I'm not even going to go to the profile browser and try a different profile because I like this one for my wildlife photos. I'm going to end it right there. The next thing I do is white balance if needed. White balance is fine. I don't need to do anything there. The next thing I do is tone. Obviously, it's these 6 sliders in the tone section of the basic panel. And what I do is as I mentioned in my previous video, I don't like using contrast slider at all. So I will never use that. What I'll do is I'll first come to highlight shadows and move one of those. And it depends which one, really what mood I'm in. If the image is really dark, I'll go to shadows right away and open it up. The image is a little bit overexposed. I'll go to highlights and pull it down. This one's fine. But what I'll do here is I look at the brightest part of an image, like right in here. And I'll take highlights down. And if you keep looking at it, all of a sudden you'll just see this detail kind of pop in. And it just popped in like it kind of popped in 3 different times. It went like there's a little more, and there's a little more. So that looks pretty good. I'll zoom back out. That's fine. Then what I'll do is I'll look at the darkest part of the image, like down in here. and I'll go to the shadows and I'll open those up. And similarly, you'll just see some detail come in. And that looks pretty good right there. And I'll zoom back out. Now I get a white and a black point the same way as I did in that landscape photo, is I hold in the Alt Option key. It's Alt if you have PC, Option if you have a Mac. Hold that key in while clicking on whites, the entire screen will turn black. Move this to the right until you see some color come through. That means you're starting to clip those channels, blue, green, red, and where you see white, that means you're blowing out all 3 channels. That means you're blowing out the highlights. Typically, I don't like to blow out the highlights, as I mentioned before, is if I print that wherever the highlights are blown out, no ink would be put down there at all. So there'd be no detail there. So what I want to do is just back that off until all of that just dissipates. And you can see it's right about there. Similarly for the blacks, I'll hold in the Alt Option key. And this time when I click in the black slider, the entire screen turns white. And then I'll move this to the left till I see some color come through. Now for my landscape image, I usually don't mind clipping the shadows a little bit. As I mentioned, I think it gives my images a lot of tonal range from absolute black to almost absolute white. I realize though that if I print the image with crushed shadows in areas where those crushed shadows are, just black ink is going to be put down and there's not going to be any detail there. So sometimes with my wildlife photography, I don't crush the shadows. I would adjust it just like I adjust the whites. Not all the time, it depends on the image, but for this image I will, because there's a lot of black on the bird. So I will adjust it exactly the same way I adjusted the whites, is I'll just move this till I see color come through, then move it the opposite direction till all that color just dissipates right around there. To me, that's a perfect black point for a wildlife image. Now, in the past, I would go to texture, clarity, dehaze, and start moving those. I would add vibrance and or saturation if needed. But with the new kind of better masking that now is available in Lightroom, I don't do that anymore. Usually what I want to do is I want the animal to be noticed. I want it to stand out. And a couple ways I'll do that is I'll make it the sharpest thing in the image. So I won't do any global sharpening. I won't do texture or clarity globally. I'll do it locally on just the animal. So I'll use masking for that. Also, I want the animal to be the most colorful thing, or, as colorful as possible. So I don't want to misrepresent the animal, though, I should say. I want it to look like it faithfully looked when I took its photo. But I could make the background a little less colorful, and so the animal stands out in those instances. But sometimes when you shoot raw, the colors are subdued anyway, and you need to increase the saturation of the animal so it looks like it looked when you saw it. So what I'll do at this point now for the wildlife image is I will go to masking. Now I should add very quickly, because I often forget to do this, if there is anything that needs to be removed where you need to use one of the removal tools, do it now before you do masking. Just the masking works better if you do the removal stuff first or before masking. Nothing needs to be removed here, so I'm not going to do it. So I'll go right to masking, and I'll start with the subject. All right. Now, I'll just increase sharpness a little bit. Now, typically what I want to do here, though, is I want to zoom in. And when you have the masking tool open, you'll just have an arrow as a cursor. You won't have the normal little magnifier glass. What you could do, though, is hold in the space bar, and you'll get that magnifier, and you can just click and zoom. So what I want to do now, because I'm only sharpening the bird, is I'll just turn this up, and I want to be careful not to over sharpen. Then what I'll do is I'll go to effects, and I usually work these from the bottom up, and I rarely will use dehaze on the animal, but I'll go up to clarity first and move that to the right a little bit, and then I'll see if it needs a little texture. You can see how that image that we started out with that was really soft because of all the noise, you can see now it's nice. It's really nice and sharp. It looks a lot better. Then finally, what I'll do here now, I want to zoom out. So hold in the space bar and click once to zoom out, is I'll go to color, and I want to just increase saturation. So it's just affecting the bird. You can see it's not affecting the background because I have the mask. Now, once I'm good there, what I'll do is I want to add another mask, and this one is for the background. So we'll do that, and that should mask everything except the bird. And really all I want to do here is I want to go to color again, but I want to pull some of the color out of the background. So I'm going to desaturate it a little bit, just like that. And there's that. And then finally, I'm really done. So now at this point, I'll just add that vignette that I often like to add. So I'll go to Effects, and I add a darker vignette, something like that, to darken the edges. It just pulls everyone's view more towards the middle of the image. So there is my finished wildlife image. And this was what we started with right here. And again, if I zoom in on this, you can see that it's just kind of blurry. It has a lot of noise. It's mainly blurry because of the noise. But then when we go to this image, you can see how it's nice and sharp. It might be a bit over sharp, and I should probably mention this, is when you're editing, a lot of times your eyes get fatigued and you'll tend to over sharpen things, and you'll tend to add too much saturation as well. So what you could do is when you're done here, don't export it to share it with the world yet. I'll walk away from your computer for at least a half hour, let your eyes focus on other things, let your eyes relax, then come back and look at it. And often, like 9 times out of 10, you'll find that it's over sharpened. I'm even looking at this now, and I think it's a little bit too sharp. So you'll see that it's over sharpened, and maybe it's a little bit too saturated as well. So definitely do that, and then come back, and if once you're satisfied with it, then export it, share it online, print it, whatever you're going to do. But definitely don't ignore that last step. That is to rest your eyes and then come back and see what it looks like again, because really it's very common, for me at least, to over sharpen the image particularly, and sometimes oversaturate the image. So be aware of that. You might be like me in that regard. So there is a workflow, and I'm saying a workflow for a purpose, when I work on a wildlife image. I will do a future video where I'll show my workflow where I maybe don't use a plugin, instead use the noise reduction that's built into Lightroom, although I don't often do that. I only do that on images that don't have a lot of noise, but need some noise reduction, and where the noise isn't really affecting the sharpness of the subject. But I will do that in the future. And then I'll do another one where I'm working on a wildlife image, but instead of using Topaz Labs Photo AI, I'll use Pure Raw 4. So you see what I do when I use Pure Raw 4, and how that comes out compared, I guess, to Photo AI. And again, today I'm just using Photo AI because I have that course on it. And of course, I'm trying to sell the course. So I'll have that linked in the description of this video, and you can take a look at it and have a discount code there as well. So that's it. Thank you, everyone who watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.